And welcome to this week's episode of Behind the Curtain, where we're going to be going into more detail based around, well, really creature work, isn't it? Because creature work has got just so much to it. Like when it, whether it's a creature with fur or a fantastical creature or whatever it is, that kind of separates it from some of the discussions that we've had about character and environment work, to the point where it kind of deserves its own category. And what better film to choose than Cocaine Bear, like, because we've seen this trailer bouncing around and with the absolutely hilarious concept, but to make an entire film out of it, and not only to make an entire film about it, it's Weta that's doing the visual effects. So one of the really big powerhouses for VFX across the world, and their work is always amazing. We really look forward to sort of seeing what they've done in this film, and but for the purpose of this video, we're going to be looking at some of the challenges of digital creature integration. So we've just picked out a few points to focus on. So fur being the first one. Fur is kind of naturally a very complex thing. So it becomes very difficult to sort of make it by hand. Like practically, you do actually pretty much hair punch it by hand of fur, one thread of fur at a time in many cases. There are flocking systems and various stuff that allow it to optimize the process, but when it comes to digital simulation of fur, there are entire systems that help us do that, but it's a challenge and it kind of its own skill set, isn't it, Chris? Like, there are entire careers you can have just being a fur person,
Yes, yeah, grooming we'd call it. So that would be a groom artist is someone who does fur, whether it's for characters or creatures or whatever. So grooming could be styling someone's hair, it could be doing it on a creature, and actually what you see is that creature work itself becomes its own speciality. So if you're someone interested in doing creature work for films, that's probably the thing that you'll do. And you could be a groom artist, for example, someone who is just working with fur, or you could fall into the category of what we'd call creature TD, TD meaning technical director. And a creature TD will handle and understand all aspects of a creature integration. So obviously, if you're making a bear, then you're going to need to understand how to create fur, but also you'll need to understand how to build musculature, or how to build jiggly fat, or how to build dribbling saliva, or whatever it might be. So all of these things are generally under the umbrella of a creature TD, or creature technical director.
You've hit on a few of our key bullet points there, so I'm just going to bring a couple more up, because we've got fur, we've got muscles and anatomy. That's another section that we're going to be talking about today. Saliva and blood simulation, really specifically kind of to this film, just because it's something that if you've got a violent bear that's tripping on cocaine, then that's the way it can go. But there's so many challenges around, do you try and do this physically, or do you try and simulate it in visual effects, and what are the challenges sort of with sort of each course of action. And then the final thing is the movement of everything, the animation. And that can include the movement of the fur, the movement of the muscles, the movement of the saliva and the blood, all of those different elements, as well as the character itself. So those are our broad topics. Chris, anything you want to expand on there?
No, I don't think so. Let me take this chance to say, if you're a filmmaker and you have a project green lighted, you have funding for a project like Cocaine Bear, you don't need to go to Weta. I will do you a Cocaine Bear for free. If you have meth pigeon, or I don't know, DMT moose or whatever, I'm in. I'm totally in. So let me know.
That is a classic offer right there. I'm really hoping that somebody takes Chris up on that, because
yes, I may regret this, because as we're going to see, actually creating digital creatures is a whole thing by itself. And and maybe that's something that you never touch on. You're doing visual effects yourself, and it's just too much for you to do, and that's fine. There's a lot of things that we'll touch on here that I think is relevant to all areas of visual effects. I would say that if you are looking to create digital characters, there is something like a pecking order, and I would say it goes like aliens being the easiest, because no one knows what an alien looks like. So me and Rich have referenced, and we will reference a ton, Gareth Edwards' debut feature film, which was Monsters, where he did all the visual effects himself, including the monsters. And there's no way that could have been about bears, because bears are the next step along. No, you would go from aliens where no one knows what it looks like, so you have a great amount of freedom, to robots.
Yeah.
Is again, like, who's to say what a robot looks like? And because they don't have a soul, well, maybe no one has a soul, but something that we couldn't label a
Whoa, that
robot as
got
having a
dark
soul.
pretty quickly.
But that makes robots easier.
Yeah.
And then you have animals. So
Oh,
animals are the
sorry,
next thing.
when do you mean a soul? Sort of, sorry, what, can I just focus in on that?
Well,
I don't quite know. Why does that make it easier if they don't have a soul in VFX?
the
Like,
thought process, it's the thought process, I guess, that's difficult. A robot thinking is just not moving, whereas
okay, right,
an
yeah.
animal or a person thinking is very different. And so, yeah, so robots just end up being easier. You also don't have, generally speaking, muscles and flesh. Obviously, depends on the robot, but a robot that moves purely based off of common mechanics is really not the most difficult thing in the world. And when it comes to building, you can kit bash it and whatever, and we've spoken about that in previous episodes of Behind the Curtain.
Yeah.
And then after that, you have animals, and then after that, you have humans. And the way that people will generally do it is they'll start with humans and go like, yeah, I want to make a human, and that's yeah, it's getting slightly easier now, with Unreal Engine and things like that.
Yeah.
Or what's it called? Make Human? Can't remember. But yeah, we have existing pre-made humans that we can leverage and put animation onto, but it still remains the highest challenge. So worth considering, if it's really important for you to get characters into your films, maybe don't do a human, maybe don't do a cocaine bear, maybe
They're at the
maybe a
higher
robot.
end, the higher
Yeah.
end of creature integration as far as complexity, especially like as a as a tutor, sort of when students try to do humans, it also, every human is kind of an expert on humans as well. Like,
Yes.
you don't have to be a fantastic artist to pick up whether a human doesn't feel quite right, like and that sort of uncanny valley aspect.
Yeah.
Anyone is going to pull your work apart, but if your fantastical alien doesn't feel right, or your flying horse or something like that, I don't know, horse is still quite close to real, but it's more forgiving because people can't instantly identify that as wrong. Like, so speaking of animals, my cat is on my desk. She's purring very loudly. If the purring is in the audio, I do apologize. If I launch her, she will attack me, and there'll be a massive scene. So,
is your cat on any drugs, Rich? Because if it is, it might have a film in the making.
Have you been on anything recently?
Cannabis cat.
She's cannabis cat. Well, that would probably make a much more relaxing recording. So let's hope it is, because you can get pretty wild. So let's actually move across to the actual trailer itself. So we've got a shot straight up on screen here, first of all. So why have you chosen this one, Chris, and what are we looking at?
Well, it's the first shot, but there's a bunch for us to dissect here, and it allows us to really start to appreciate the complexity of doing creature work, because obviously the process to get to here is that you would need to have a model of a bear, right? And this being Weta, they probably made it from the ground up. If you've done a bear before, if you're a big studio, then you may be able to pick up a bear from another film that you did. If you're doing it yourself, you'll be able to find pre-made animals very easily. Turbo Squid, something like that. You can find pretty good ones, I'm sure. That's your starting point. And then you need to paint the thing. You need to put shaders on it, which is how it reacts to light, how shiny it is, or whatever. And then you need to put fur over the top of it. And then you need to animate it. And that's still not everything, because as we can see here, he's got saliva, dribbling from his mouth, and that's part of what's going to sell the ferocity of the thing. Even as we can see here, there's kind of like snot coming out of his nose, and that's why it's shiny just beneath the nostril. All of these little things help sell it, and it's because of the complexity of digital creature work that there is always a temptation to go, well, can we at least just do some shots with a real animal? And my approach is always, if you can do it in camera, then do it in camera. But I've done quite a lot of films now where we've needed to do digital animals for no reason other than they couldn't quite get the performance out of the animal they wanted. So, for example, we did a film called Jungle Tribes, very indie film, and all very low budget. You know, they just literally went to the jungle and shot it, but they needed a sequence of a wild boar just running through the jungle, and they were able to get hold of a wild boar, but they couldn't get it to run into the person in the way they wanted it to. So we had to replace it. We even can't remember what it was called. Did another comedy with where they had a rabbit hopping about, and the rabbit literally just needs to go from screen left to screen right. It doesn't need to perform, it just needs to do that, but it didn't. It just didn't move. So, you know, the old thing of like not working with children or animals, certainly true, I would say, or at least you can do it. I mean, children are a bit more difficult to replace in visual effects. Animals get replaced all the time. And you know, filmmakers will always try, and why not? You know, give it a go if you can with an animal. If you can do it in camera, then do it. But I think in this trailer there are shots where the bear looks completely real to me, but I think that's just Weta doing an amazing job. I think that you know, when you're dealing with it at the highest level, at that point there's often the temptation just to go, do you know what? Let's, you know, maybe you have the animal on set so you get reference, but let's actually have the whole animal visual effects, because then you can guide the performance, you know, and especially for a comedy thing, you know, even just the timing of a blink or something like that might be really important. And I think, you know, Cocaine Bear is obviously leaning into the whole B movie thing, and then at the same time supplementing it with a very, very, very expensive bear. What I assume was an expensive bear, at least. And what if they had lent in all the way and they just had someone in a bear suit? I don't think that would have worked so well. I think then it's going too much in the B movie thing, and we can't really imagine what an actual cocaine bear would be like, because he's so distracted that it's a guy in a suit. So so I think actually it was important that even though it's a joke film, that the effects were, you know, absolutely spot on. As well, my own theory is that visual effects should be avoided for comedy and horror. I just don't think that people respond well to digital comedy or horror. And so that means if you are doing comedy and horror, you need to do it really, really, really well, which is what they've done here. So, so yeah, even just looking at this one shot, we can see, you know, how much they've had to consider there in terms of, you know, making the bear, putting the fur on it, putting textures, shaders, lighting, all of that, saliva, and then even what there will be here is a muscle system, which as the bear is animated, makes the muscles move in a believable way underneath the surface of the skin. So a ton of complexity there.
I mean, and if we talk about the most efficient way to produce things, like with a creature with fur like this, is things like the anatomy and the muscle system, is it a little bit more forgiving?
It's more forgiving, yeah. Like the model underneath here could be just a sphere, really, you know, because the fur is so thick. I mean, you'll find that it won't be. That it, you know, the modeler who was making it would have had great pride in making it, and underneath the fur you'll find perfect bear anatomy. But and you know,
the
why
little
not,
wrinkles.
but it is an example of like, yeah, may as well make it good, but no one is ever going to see it. And when you're doing stuff on a budget, it's very useful to keep on reminding yourself of what the end result is and what matters and what doesn't, because obviously like everything around the face is going to matter a huge amount. In the body, like, you'll get away with so much.
We did a hyena a long time ago, and I remember the skin of a hyena is really quite dark, and we shoved on like a very quick texture pass for the underlying skin of the hyena, and then we did a whole load of work on the film and blah blah blah, blah, went all the way through and did all the fur stuff and everything like that and all these wonderful layers. I don't think we ever replaced that first really fast texture of the skin, just because so much was covered with fur and things like that. It just didn't. It wasn't the most important thing to do. So there are things that you get away with. Like
this is why, you know, when I'm teaching it, I teach people just get to the end result as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Right. Just sprint your way to the end goal, and then because then when you're in shot, then you can see what needs to change. So, for example, this shot, which I think is the most difficult shot in the trailer, because, you know, the bear is so close to camera, and so this is the one where you're really going to need to just make sure that everything is working perfectly. And there are a couple of different approaches you can take to that. One is you make everything absolutely perfect, which is, if you have a large budget, typically what will happen. So like I say, the underlying anatomy will be perfect. Every bit of painting will be perfect. Every bit of fur will be perfect, whatever. But then the thing is, by the time you get to the end, it's not going to be the sum of its parts. Something's going to start to go off. Something's going to start to go wrong. So where I think a large part of the visual effects supervisor's job lies is in looking at the end result and just going, okay, what is the thing that we need to change here? And this can often be very difficult when you have, in visual effects, we'll run dailies meetings where 10, 20 artists might be sat in a room looking at the shots and just going, okay, we think we need to change this, we need to change that. And there's always a billion things that you can change. And not all of them are equally important. So whatever budget you're on, there's a skill that I recommend practicing, which I call the most important thing. And it's just going, if I could only change one thing about this shot, what would I change? And whatever that thing is, might be different for you, Rich, as it is to me, or whatever. But just by thinking about that, you're starting to think about prioritizing and figuring out what matters. And if you're an audience member, what is it that's taking you out of the shot right now? And here, like, you can see they have covered their bases so well. Like there is blood breaking up the fur. Where
don't think your annotations on, Chris. So I'm not quite seeing anything coming through on the screen.
Anything, but
sorry.
Where we can see blood, it's shinier. There's little things like this that looks like I don't know if it is, but it looks like a little bit of flesh stuck onto it. These happy little accidents that really help sell the thing. And yet, even with all of those in place, there's always going to be something where it's like, yeah, but it's not quite sitting right. Or what would you change to make it sit a little bit better? And that's a really difficult skill. And honestly, like, you can never know until you've tried it. But it's a skill worth trying. So for me, if we were delivering this, I'd be going, do you know what? Like the teeth, we've definitely had this before, where teeth come out for whatever reason looking very solid and very white, like they're almost similar thing to that, like they're made out of wood. And once you've done a certain amount of creature work, you go like, well, they have a huge amount of translucency in them. The wild creature teeth are much closer to orange or yellow than they are to white. And it could be, and I have no idea, and I could be totally wrong, but that just by addressing that, then other things start to fall into place. And what you'll see once you start practicing this skill of the most important thing is it's like a puzzle piece, right? When you're trying to put in the wrong puzzle piece because it looks like it's the right fit, right? It's like it's the same color and you're trying to force it in and it just doesn't work. But when you make the right decision, you have the right idea, you choose the right puzzle piece, what you find is it fits on all sides and it solves everything around it. And what you'll notice is if you catch the higher priority things, then what looks like a list of 30 things that you're going to have to change drops dramatically if you just start attacking.
Okay, so as the big ones resolve, then other ones, it sort of falls into place. It all starts to click, like so.
Yeah, they either get resolved by default because actually their problem was tied to the problem of the big thing. Or you just stop caring about them because you go, well, the shot works now.
Now it works, right? Okay. So I guess you can engineer it the other way around then, I guess. So if a shot really isn't working and you've got a discussion of like, oh, maybe it's this tiny little hair that's slightly out of place on the left hand side here and things like that, the chances are you're barking up the wrong tree. There's probably like one or two critical things that you need to identify.
Yes, I think so. I think so. There are some situations where I call it like death by 1,000 cuts, where it's kind of like everything there is working. It just needs to all be a tiny bit better.
That's it.
But honestly, like I'm starting to think that that's less and less of a thing. That there is always one thing or two things that matter more than anything else. So even though I teach this as the most important thing, in reality, it's one or two or three. And if I'm giving feedback, then I would pick 3 at most. So in this case, I might go, well, let's see what happens if we change the teeth. Eyes are always an absolute killer. The eyes are beautiful here, but maybe just how unbroken that line of shininess is. As we've touched on before, just having things more gnarly, more broken up does help. Like things that are consistently even though that happens in real life, is a more difficult sell digitally. So if that line starts to break a little bit, then that would be my second thing. Honest to God, I can't pick a third thing. So maybe I'd look at the shadowing of that. But I honestly don't think you've always got to think, where is the audience looking if you want to save money? And the audience is looking right here. If the audience member is looking over there, screw them. You don't want to cater to them. And potentially, even if they're looking there, they're just no. Where the money wants to go is right here in the face. Even the shoulder, the arm, whatever, it's out of focus. They're not looking there. It's not going to matter.
Okay, it's interesting. I mean, there's so much just in that last sentence. Like the fact that the creature is so close to your face, yes, it's really unforgiving because there's so much detail we need to get right in that area. But when the camera is focusing on something very close, then you will get depth of field. And therefore, if you can anticipate that, if you can plan for that, then you're going to know that there's areas of the creature which are going to be easier to resolve. So yeah, it's all these subtleties that can make a task that seems pretty impossible kind of manageable. An interesting observation is in the previous shot we saw like quite obvious drool coming off the bear. I thought this shot would have been a bigger case for a drooly bear, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, that's interesting that they chose not to go that route because yeah, I think to anything that breaks things up, bits of drool and whatever, anything that adds secondary animation, all of that kind of stuff always really helps sit stuff in. And if we go back, you can see how well the drool works in that previous shot. So let me just come out of my annotation mode. Even though it's a really short shot, but you just you see, like, as he moves his mouth, how that stuff all jiggles.
Yeah.
So this is what we'd call secondary movements, secondary animation. His primary animation, the primary animation is the bear itself, and then you have the knock-on effect of that, and that stuff always helps. Even if you're doing a robot, contemporary robots often don't move very much. They don't have visual pistons or whatever, but any way that you can get that extra movement. So in Outside the Wire, for example, we left a lot of the wiring of the robots exposed. It's kind of stupid, if they're going to war, you might not want that. But the advantage of what you get from that is that as the robot moves, they will jiggle about, and it's going to give you that secondary movement that just helps bed everything into the shot a little bit more. So let's find another bear shot. Inspired by true events. It's really happened.
God, that cannot be a happy story.
No, I think it ended pretty badly for the bear. You can see here, it's like the teeth there,
super yellow. Now that is really strange to me, because I don't know why the same 3D asset would have different texture passes, and I don't think you could explain it with just the lighting. The lighting suddenly made the other teeth feel white, if you get what I mean. I mean, maybe it was because those teeth were covered in blood rather than actually covering it in blood. Maybe they built that into a separate texture thing. I don't know, but it does seem a little bit strange to me that the color changed. But I see what you mean now by the naturalness as well. Like this straight away for me feels like, oh yeah, those are bear teeth, sort of thing.
I don't know why they were coming out that white in the previous shot, but also there is a thing where it's just like, I don't know, sometimes stuff just happens. I mean, it happens in real life as well. Sometimes, you might be analyzing a thing actually in front of you and going, why does that look like that? Or whatever, And so that happens in visual effects as well. And then it's another justification for going like, okay, maybe if you want to work efficiently, maybe don't try and make everything perfect. And then assume that you just push that through the pipeline and it comes out the other end perfect. Maybe you sprint to the end as soon as possible, and then you know what the parameters are, and then you can work with them.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, I think it was Life of Pi where I think it was a tiger on a boat, wasn't it? And I think they did 10% of the shots with a real tiger, a real trained tiger, and that was apparently to really push the VFX team to then have to match that, like you know, sort of make it so if you're cutting between the CG tiger and the real tiger, then that, you know, that work has to be exceptional. Here, I'm trying to, you know, see, is there any obviously where they might be doing the same? And I don't think we've seen any real bears yet. Like, yeah,
I mean, I think there are shots where you could have tried to use a real bear, like here where it's a raw, um, for example, or let's see further along here where it's not specifically doing anything. But I think that the team doing this would have just gone. I think they would have had enough experience knowing that actually it's probably not going to do what they want. They know they're going to get a really good bear, so they're not even going to try.
yeah,
I might be wrong. Like this shot here is an example of, you know, I would definitely be tempted if I was supervising this to go like, do you know what? Could we get just like a bear, you know, arm? Could we taxidermy it? And yeah, just use for shots like this. So then we don't need to worry about the digital stuff. I don't think they have. Like I think as that arm slams down, just the movement of it, it feels like it does a little judder, which is what you'd expect if it had mobile bones inside and things like that. So even on a shot where it may be much easier to go with a practical, they've gone with the digital, which I think helps them keep the quality consistent. But what it means is like, okay, well, a practical thing can interact with the MOS no problem, because as we said before, reel on reel, that's fine. But here, assuming that I'm right and this is a digital bear arm, then you're going to need some digital MOS for those claws to go into, and then, you know, you're opening up.
it's really interesting, isn't it? Like if you've got like a thonking massive prop arm thing that slams into the tree next to her, you know, the actor can actually, you know, play off that as well. Like,
Yeah.
you know, is in it sort of like, oh my god, something massive has just hit next to my head. I mean, they maybe did hit the tree with something big as a timing clue, and then put the
Yes.
the digital claw over the top. Like, you know, as we've mentioned in previous videos, by keeping it in CG, you do give yourself flexibility. But because you can change the timing of it, you can change, you know, you're not locked into what was filmed on the camera. Sorry, I'm just, some of these shots are amazing. They're just going by. But
Yeah. I mean, this is another contender for where it's like, okay, surely you can get a real bear to do that performance, you know,
yeah,
have some delicious on that leg, and it's gonna give it a sniff and whatever. I don't think it is. I think that's a digital bear, and yeah, I think by just leaning into digital, it just allows them to have the comedy beats that they want to have, you know, without it being, to give them control over the comedy beats. Because like I said, obviously having someone in a bear suit, that's funny, but in a different way. It becomes less about the bear and more about the B moviness. Let's go back to this shot, because there is something here that I think is not necessarily obvious, but gives you an idea for like how in depth the team would have had to go here. So in last week's Behind the Curtain, we were speaking about the meeting point, right, where the digital thing meets reality, and I often like to hide that meeting point if I can, have it in a non-obvious place, and I find that helps me get away with the integration a little bit more easily. But here, the meeting point is just going to be so obvious because it's digital bear and real ground, right? But what you can see here, as he's pushing himself along, that ground is moving. And it's moving in a way that's convincing, right? Where the pebbles are actually getting pushed to one side and things. And so this is, you know, it's not the most difficult thing in the world to do. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. It certainly takes some practice to be able to do that. You know, what you'd need is to just create lots and lots of little pebbles, and then you simulate those getting pushed along. Which this would have probably been done in Houdini, but you can do something like that in Blender. And so then the meeting point is slightly hidden because it's not where the bear meets the ground. It's where this stuff here meets the ground.
Now, someone could have done it in shot, couldn't they? They could have actually kind of just crawled in that area and then pushed a little mound forward. They then lined up where the CG bear was. You paint out the person because the bear gets dropped over the top. What's making you think there that that is a little CG pile of pebbles rather than someone actually doing that in real life?
Uh, well, I mean, so if I say that this stuff, let me annotate this. If I say that this stuff, I believe is real.
Yeah,
The stuff near him, all of that, basically everything there, right? I'm saying that's real. I don't know how obvious this is going to be as I play it through, but if I play that through, the real stuff doesn't move at all, right?
yeah.
So like those rocks just there, these I would expect to at least wobble, at least in some way be affected, and they're not. So that's what makes me think that
So it
actually
makes
there's a
you think
separate.
nothing was ever there. Like otherwise we would have seen something, some
Yeah,
sort of movement. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
okay, I get you. Right.
Um, I mean, what you could do to avoid that is you actually just replace a much bigger area, but then that's more work. And the other thing, like Rich, this thing of doing whatever you can do in camera, you could absolutely have someone just with a broom pushing rocks along, and that I don't think is a silly thing. I don't think it's an indie thing that you wouldn't do on a budget or whatever. I think it's literally just a choice of the visual effects supervisor, and maybe they shot a couple of takes, right? Maybe they have takes where they have someone creating the context of the bear, and other takes where they don't. And the fact here is that because the actors are so distant from the bear, you could even mix and match takes, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
you could have. Yeah,
Uh,
assume you got a static camera or a reproducible camera,
yeah, right,
like
right. Good point.
like
Yes,
then
the camera here is static
that
with a very subtle movement on
could
it.
be a
So
post movement maybe. Like yeah, like
yeah, yeah. Our preference in visual effects is to have the movement in post if you can. Moving cameras a lot in post is never very convincing, but it doesn't make certain things easier. So yeah, in this
and
case,
just one of those things where if you're on a budget, if a budget is your concern, then you can eliminate so many tasks just by having the camera static. It's just one of it's one of those wins
yeah,
where
yeah. Well, I guess we'll cover a lot more tasks, but still, cameras are your friend. There is so much more you can get away with.
yeah,
Obviously, there is a price to pay because maybe you don't want everything static, but something to think about. Um, and yeah, Rich, coming back to this idea of the most important thing, like if we had one thing to change to level up this shot, um, I think where I would go is in the contact point. And like I say, the meeting point, the point where digital meets reality, that's always a pain in the ass to figure out. That's always where you want to spend a lot of time and a lot of attention. And here, if they'd missed the shadow of the bear on the ground completely, for example, that would have been a disaster.
yeah,
Here, they of course they haven't missed it. But what's I think throwing me a little bit on this is like, if I look at the reference of what is in the plate, right? And we go, okay, it's lots and lots of little pebbles, but there are some bigger rocks or leaves or whatever they are, right? These things here. Those things cast a pretty dark shadow through there. And I don't see that anywhere in here. Not only do I not see that, everywhere that the bear's in shadow, I see as being lighter than that.
yeah.
Um,
And I would instantly look for something else in shot that's of a similar size, mass, contact to what the bear is
right.
doing, and you've got two humans like
Yeah. Yeah.
on
Yeah.
the like,
Exactly.
and so I'd be looking exactly, and it's exactly what you're saying is occurring there. Like if you look at that sort of darkness and what's going on there, it feels different to the shadow that they have artificially put on the bear, and it seems a little bit more than a shadow. It looks like they've actually like almost put like a layer of color in there or something. Like I'm not, it's quite a soft
Yeah.
contact point.
Yeah,
Like
yeah. So this is this is a skill worth putting time into of looking for similar things in the shot and just going, what is the quality of that thing that is different, So here it's the darkness, right? So the darkness of that shadow feels consistent with these things over here,
yeah,
as does the color. So I think that would give me confidence to go, okay, yeah, let's make it a little bit more like that. The slightly trickier thing to address is that because the ground has lots of movement on it, it's a textured surface. The shadow even though this is a somewhat overcast day, so it means the shadows are soft, the edge of the shadow does have a kind of broken line because the ground itself is broken.
Yeah.
And this is often a nightmare for us digitally, because we often end up with very soft shadows because we probably don't have, we're probably not working with a replication of the actual floor, right? If we had a replica of the floor, then that would have all of this broken texture in it, and we don't. So what you'll notice is that a lot of time where we'll fall down in our integration is with the shadows feeling kind of soft and a little bit mushy, and lacking that kind of little bit of chaos to it. If in doubt, put chaos in the shot. That always kind of helps bed things in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I there's no way of knowing that thing would improve the shot or whatever. Like I say, in this practice of the most important thing, the best you can do is an educated guess.
Yeah.
It's again why you don't want to overthink stuff too much. You just kind of go, well, I think it's that. Let's try it. And so, if I was casting this out to an artist and asking someone else to do it, I would always go, if we do this, what is the time hit there? Because if they say, look, for X reason, it's going to take me 3 days to look into this shadow, then I might go, do you know what? Maybe the most important thing is something that we have time to do, and I'll find something else that might be like a half day or a 1 hour task or whatever, So yeah, finding out what the most important thing is without getting pulled into a rabbit hole, I guess it's a pretty useful skill.
Okay, so that standing up shot's interesting. We're at 36 minutes, so we've got a good chunk of content. Just again, I keep flicking back, thinking, is there a real bear used? And just the way the bear stands, the animation in the previous one, like it makes it feel like, for me, that it's not a real bear. There's something very light and springy about it, which might be part of the fact that it's meant to be on cocaine or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Isn't they want to sort of like characterify it all the way through the film, if you get what I mean.
I think so. The way it kind of rolls over like a puppy with real ease there.
Yeah.
Probably in context, that's that's probably really an important part of the shot. And if so this if I could buy this as a real bear, agile as anything, I guess, to roll that amount
Ninja
of
bear.
mass around, but it's just done it so well, and the contact stuff that we've spoken about before, working even better here. You see how all those pebbles get kind of pushed and knocked to the side and whatever. It's real attention to detail. That, I guess, could easily be a real bear. I'm pretty sure that it's not, because again, like, you probably have to annoy a bear quite a lot to get that performance out of it. Maybe that's not what you want on set. And then like we spoke about before, that would be a contender, but I think they've gone all in. And the way that it launches itself up the tree, can a bear launch itself up like that? I don't know, but it's it's everything about the bear is very convincing. And then towards the end, the bear's doing stuff that it absolutely could never do, and yet I'm totally convinced by it, which is all of this stuff. I'm sold. I think
that running sequence is brilliant. Yeah, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, we've mentioned this before, of like sticking a little bit of lens flare over the top of stuff to help bed stuff in, right? Because you kind of that helps you handle the meeting point. I swear it's like there we go, boom, just a
flash. Good spot. Yeah.
To help sit that in, or they trained a real ambulance chasing bear. Could be either one, but anyway, I think that's all I have to say on Cocaine Bear. Congratulations to the guys who did it. Absolutely amazing work.
Do you mind if we expand on one tiny thing, which is sort of the blood saliva thing? Just because it's one of the bullet points at the beginning, and we've not covered it in that much detail. So, when would you choose? Here, if the bear is CG, then we're limited. Yeah, as in the blood now has to be CG, because you can't have real blood with no bear there. Like, there's nothing to put it on. But if you say, for example, there were some shots where you think, oh, I could have had a real bear there, and then I could have had real blood. Like, what are the advantages, disadvantages, if we just talked about sort of like doing something like a blood effect on set?
Yeah, well, it's always, you know, doing it everything in post gives you total control. That's what makes us lazy potentially as filmmakers or visual effects artists. You know, the whole fix it in post silliness comes from the fact that, yeah, you do get a lot of control in post, but the best results often come from a combination of having something real and augmenting it. So yeah, there are some shots where we are very, not this one, some shots where we're very close to the bear's nose, not that one either, but potentially here, right? You could just go, you know, the bear isn't really moving very much. So you could, if you really wanted to plan this out and it was really important you had a practical thing in shot, is that you could make a practical bear and then just replace the things that need nuanced movement, like the eyes twitching or whatever it is, right? So the advantage of that is that, you know, you could, the fur would be convincing, and you could do that by hair punching or flocking, like you mentioned earlier, Rich, or for parts of it, you can literally just get actual fur, actual skin of an animal and put it over it. And real fur is obviously always convincing. And then to add the blood and the saliva and all of that stuff, which has the effect of matting the fur and making it feel less fluffy and you know, has all these secondary effects, that's very easy. Then you just stick it on. So yeah, anytime when you could, which I would say, if you were going down that route, I would choose things that aren't going to move very much, and then just lean in. You know, I would also do it based off of story, right? Which I know can sound pretentious, but I'm always going, what's the story of this shot? So here, I guess this is, I don't know, I haven't seen the film yet, but I guess here he hasn't had the full hit of cocaine or he's on a come down. I don't know, like he's mellow here, right? So clearly the point of the shot is not snot and blood and all of that stuff. Right, so you could add it in, but it's not going to add to your story. Whereas when he's ferociously roaring, then saliva just spitting out, hitting the camera, whatever it is really going to help. So you kind of need to think, where are you going? How important is it in the context of the shot? And then how important is it that it feels real? And you know, I think a smart approach is to at least try it if you can. I mean, actually, Harry Potter was one of the first films maybe the first. I did Harry Potter and V for Vendetta at the same time. So one of those two was the first. I can't remember which. But in Harry Potter, there was the werewolf in the first Harry Potter. And I remember then they were trying the trick of getting a dog and putting vaginal lube all over its mouth, you know, KY jelly, I think. I can't remember. But to give it the feeling of ferocity and saliva and whatever, because if you can get it real, then even better. But as is nearly always the case, if you haven't planned it out meticulously, you end up just replacing it digitally anyway. So if there are things where it's not moving very much, then and you can find the option to have a practical replacement, then I would say do it. You know, especially on a budget, but even on a very high budget film, just having that little bit of reality, even if you don't use it, it might help the visual effects artist as a guide.
And there's some nuances as well, like if it's say blood getting sprayed onto somebody's face or something, like if you do it in real, then you always get the real reaction of the actors as well. Like, you know, that whenever there's a sensation which is really quite unpleasant or something like that, you will get, without any optionality, a very convincing sort of just natural instinctive reaction from the actor. So
yes. I mean, so in Half Bad, or The Bastard Son of the Devil himself, we had a lot of shots where we sprayed the actors with blood, but then we also added in more digital blood so we could use that for the storytelling beats, like to make sure it hits just that area and whatever. But they're still reacting to, you know, red corn syrup essentially getting blasted in their face. There is the opposite side to this, which might be a good beat to leave it on, but it's, I think, a interesting consideration. Where blood and effects like that can become problematic is in continuity, because the actor touches their face and then suddenly that whole blood effect looks different in all takes from that point onwards.
Yeah.
So actually, one area where you might want to consider digital blood is in like bleeding wounds and things like that, because then you can control the continuity. David Fincher, who uses visual effects just amazingly well, does what we call a lot of invisible effects, where it's not obvious that it's an effect. Does exactly that. Uses does his wounds in post so that he can control it very precisely, rather than, because he's doing a lot of takes, right? If you're a director who has a ton of takes, you want to be able, you're doing that for a reason, and moving fluids are going to limit the continuity of takes.
God, fascinating. So that is a whole massive world of real digital into sort of creature integration there. So much to think about, and something to really take away, that if you're going to do a digital creature, then all of this secondary movement, all of the things on that list, I mean, that list that we first talked about there, some of those things might not have even appeared in your head as major things. Do you get what I mean? Like, but they are all there when it comes to creatures, and they all have to come together in order for the creature to be convincing. So a lot to think about, a lot of challenges, but some really, really satisfying work, and a whole range of skills as well, Chris. Like, as you're saying, like the groom artist, like just being a dedicated artist that really just focuses on fur in some of the larger studios. That's how niche jobs can get. So it becomes a really, really interesting world. Anything you want to finish on, Chris?
Well, I think all of the stuff that we've touched on here is stuff that maybe you won't do, maybe you will, but it doesn't really matter, in the sense that the skills that you need to be a good groom artist, for example, yes, there are technical skills of understanding how fur works and whatever, and that actually nowadays Blender is incredibly powerful at fur, so you can learn those skills for free. But ultimately, even if you were to never touch creatures, the skills that we've spoken about, the being able to prioritize, understand what is the most important thing, use existing reference in plate to match to, all of that stuff, it's not tied to creatures. I started my career in creatures and spent a lot of time specializing in creatures, and now I oversee kind of anything that needs doing. And for me, I don't see a line there. The skills that I learned doing that, I can use if I'm doing a building that's crumbling down or whatever. There's a lot of overlap. It's learning to see, I suppose, and learning to recreate that reality.
And then identify that most important thing to work on next, like to improve the shot. Okay, brilliant. Well, let's leave things there then. Thank you very much for joining us. As always, please do comment. Let us know any further information about sort of what you'd like to see in these series. We're going to be picking a few interesting comments, subtopics over the Christmas period as well. But we're always happy to be informed by what you guys want. This is for you, so let's make it as relevant as possible. So thanks for joining us, and catch you in the next one.